So after flying the Mini 4 Pro for about 3 weeks now, I put together a list over the things that you might not know about this drone or the things that you might want to know before you buy one. So let's start with DJI's own conversion LUTs. So the Mini 4 Pro has that new 10-bit D-Log-M color profile, which allows for better dynamic footage and more custom color grading. This means you'll have a higher dynamic range and will maintain more details in the highlights and shadows when color correcting and grading your footage, without immediately crushing the highs and lows when adjusting the sliders in your editing software. But DJI has now made this easier for everyone that wants to use the D-Log-M color profile by offering a D-Log-M to Rec. 709 conversion LUT. And after applying the conversion LUT, there's only minor adjustments you need to do in order to make the footage look good. And this works perfectly for me and when I use my signature LUT. So the only thing I have to do basically is to adjust the midtone, saturation and the intensity of the LUT to make the footage pop. So I'll leave a link to my signature LUTs down below if you want to learn more. Now, traveling with the Mini 4 Pro over the past few weeks, I've actually been organizing my files depending on the location I've flown. And this is to make it easier for myself when I get back home to edit my videos. And this is all thanks to the new file management on the Mini 4. So what you do is to go over to the settings menu and over to the camera section. Here you're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and on the top now you see custom folder naming. What you can do here is to type in the location of, for example, where you will be flying. So for each location I flew, I added the location or the nearest location in order to easily find the clips from that place. And when I drove to a different place, I just removed the current text and type in a new one and hit record. And the folder would be automatically created and the footage was applied to this folder as soon as the recording stopped. Now going back to the controller and scrolling a bit up, we have the style settings. These can also be found in the camera section. These are not new and we have these with the Mini 3 Pro as well, but this is a nice way to tweak your footage additionally if you want to do less in post, as of adding sharpness and noise reduction. The settings that I use is to have the sharpness on -1 and noise reduction to the default 0. And by having the sharpness set to at least -1, it takes away some of the additional unwanted sharpness you might get if you're not using an ND filter or if you're using a really high shutter speed. But as I always say when it comes to these two settings, take your drone out and find a location and do your own testing, try with the different parameters of sharpness and noise reduction, and then you can easily find out which one you prefer. But personally, I wouldn't actually touch the noise reduction parameters because I think it looks the best when it's set to the default 0. Now talking about ND filters, it's easy to think that the ND filters from the Mini 3 Pro will work on the Mini 4 Pro because the camera looks identical, but sadly they don't. So you would need to get some additional ND filters if you want to pick up and have some ND filters for the Mini 4 Pro. Even though there's little to no difference between the two cameras on the Mini 3 and 4, there is a difference in the way that they are mounted. We can also see here that the lens itself on the Mini 4 is slightly bigger than the one on the Mini 3 Pro. Now there's also a few options when it comes to available ND filters for the Mini 4 Pro now. You have the original DJI ND filters, which comes in a set of 4, but if you want a huge variety of ND filters, I can highly recommend the ND filters from Freewell. And these are filters I've been using for 6 years now. Ever since I started using a drone, I've been using ND filters from Freewell, so I highly recommend these. And here you have all types of different ND filters. Comes with a mist filter, comes with UV filters, ND filters, ND polarized filters, ND 1000 for photography, and this LPR. I'm not sure what that stands for, but you get everything you need. So I'll leave a link to this down in the description below. Now talking about filters, the lens and the camera itself, one of the big questions and one of the questions I get asked a lot is whether or not the Mini 4 Pro had the same fog issues as a lot of people have experienced with the Mini 3 Pro, including myself. Now this was a moderate problem when I was flying the Mini 3 Pro in Hawaii last year, and it ruined quite a few of my shots actually, but thankfully I didn't experience it that often. But flying the Mini 3 and the Mini 4 Pro in Hawaii now, which was extremely hot by the way, 111 degrees Fahrenheit in the shades at times, so you can just imagine the amount of heat the Mini 4 was experiencing. But there's also a lot of humidity in Hawaii because of the tropical environment, and this seemed to be a problem with my Mini 3 Pro and the reason I had these fog issues, but of course in combination with the high temperatures. But this actually seemed to be fixed on the Mini 4 Pro, Pro, I've been flying this in the same places as the Mini 3. The only difference now was more humidity and even higher temperatures, and I didn't experience any fog at all, which I'm pretty happy about. Now, as of high temperatures and overheating, the Mini 3 and 4 both performed great, and at times I believe it was 50, maybe close to 60 degrees Celsius in the sun. It felt like an oven, but the Mini 4 performed extremely good and there was no warnings to be seen. Even the Mini 3 Pro performed good without any warnings. But just like with the Mini 3 Pro, the Mini 4 Pro also comes without an internal fan, so there's nothing that cools it down. The only difference I've seen so far is that the Mini 4 performs better in terms of firmware updates and standstills. So usually when I updated the firmware on the Mini 3 Pro and had a poor Wi-Fi connection, it happened that the drone overheated and shut down. But with the Mini 4 Pro, the drone will enter this eco mode and prevent the drone from overheating. But as a real life use, there's no difference when it comes to the Mini 3 and 4 when it comes to overheating. It's only that when you stand still and update the firmware in a real life scenario, when you're out flying, capturing some amazing footage, you're not going to experience any differences between these two. Now, another question I get asked a lot is whether or not the Mini 3 Pro batteries and the Mini 3 batteries are compatible with the Mini 4. And the short answer is yes. They have a perfect fit. So here we have the Mini 3 Pro battery or the Mini 3 battery, and it snaps in place perfectly, and you can also see that it lights up here on the drone. But the only downside with this though is that the drone is no longer 249 grams. It's actually 251.3 grams, which means it's above that 249 gram limit. So in order to fly this legally, you will actually have to use the included batteries for the Mini 4 Pro. Now, there's also a difference when it comes to milliamp hour on these two batteries. So we have the Mini 4 Pro battery being 2590 milliamp hour, and the Mini 3 Pro being a slightly less at 2453 milliamp hours. So there is a difference between these two batteries. You're not going to be able to notice any differences. There's only 2 grams difference between these two, but it's enough to put the Mini 4 Pro above the sub 250 gram category limit, which you are required to fly within using a mini drone. So yeah. Now, another question, which is the height limit. Does the Mini 4 Pro still have the height limit of 120 meters? No, it has been lifted by DJI, but prior to my departure to Hawaii, I was only limited here in Europe to fly within 120 meters. But as soon as I got to the States, had the same firmware update, the drone automatically recognized that I was in the States, and I was able to push the slider up to 500 meters. But now that I go back to Europe, this has been lifted, so we're able to fly up to 500 meters in height with the Mini 4 Pro in Europe as well. But this is only for now. As of 2024, all mini drones will be limited to 120 meters. And this is not a rule set by DJI, it's the rule coming from the EASA. So unfortunately, it seems like there's an end to our mountain climbing with the mini drones as of 2024. But if you want to learn more on this topic, I'll leave a link to my source down in the description below so you can see what applies from the beginning of next year. Now, talking about limits, the new DJI RC2 and the RCN2 controller, can these be used with the Mini 3 Pro? No, unfortunately, this is not compatible with any other drones than the Mini 4 Pro and the Air 3. But the question is, will this be compatible with all the drones in the future? Now, because the controller is running with the new OcuSync 4.0, it will not be compatible with the older drones like the Mini 3 Pro and the Mavic 3. So in order for the controller to be used with the drone, it has to be running off the same transmission system. And at the moment, there's only the Air 3 and the Mini 4 Pro, which runs off the OcuSync 4.0. So if you already have the Mini 4 Pro and eventually want to change it over to the Air 3 or the other way around, it's enough to only buy the drone as a standalone. Now, another new feature which was introduced to the Mini 4 Pro was Active Track 360. From my experience though, this is both good and awful at the same time. So from my trip to Hawaii, I figured to get the best optimal, stable, smoothest possible shot, you might want to use the front and rear tracking and just leave it to either of these. Tracking from either side is a bit unstable, and creating that dynamic tracking route is working 1 out of 10 times. So to me, it kind of takes away the whole 360 dynamic tracking feature, which I was so excited about. So it's from my testing and from the experience that I have with the Mini 3 Pro, in performance, there's not that much difference. It also comes down to how you're gonna use these. So if I didn't have the side sensors when I was going on a hike, it would probably crash. If I was doing the same tracking on the Mini 3 during those hikes, it will probably crash. So that's one of the things as well that I am really happy about, that I have those sensors. But at the end, the shot turned out unusable because it was drifting in, stopping, hovering, and trying to bypass. So the shot was all over the place, and at the end I was only able to use a few seconds from each tracking sequence. But it is enough, and it is better than the Mini 3 Pro in that term because I was able to use it. The Mini 3 Pro would probably crash, but I would probably track this in a different way anyway. But I really like that you can change the settings of this, and changing the settings of the active track might actually make it look better. So if we go over to the settings tab here again and over to the control section, there's a section called focus track settings. Here you can adjust and tune the settings to your preferred distance, height, as well as camera motion. So you have the inner and outer radius here, where you can adjust the distance of how far away the drone should track you. By default, it's set to 5 meters on the inner radius and 10 meters on the outer radius. But by increasing the distance on both, the tracking seem to perform better and be less jerky. And the same thing goes for height. I actually found 4 and 8 meters to be the best result, or to give the best result when tracking my hikes. You also have two options when it comes to the camera motion. You have the normal one, which bypasses the obstacle in a more subtle way to keep a smoother flight. And you also have the fast one, which gives a more dynamic change in altitude and distance. But personally, I found the normal to give the best and most stable image for my tracking. A new feature to the Mini 4 Pro is also waypoints, but this has been available on the bigger drones for some time. But now to have this on a mini drone is amazing. Given my slightest disappointment when it comes to active track, this is one awesome feature. And I would say this is by far the easiest and most effortless way of getting amazing footage with your Mini 4 Pro. The only thing you have to do is to set different points, so where you want the drone to fly from and to. So when you set the first point, the drone will save the location, altitude, and the gimbal angle by default. And when you fly to a different location and adjust the gimbal to a different angle and hit go, the Mini 4 Pro will actually fly from point A to point B, creating a dynamic shot between the points. But a pro tip here is to not overdo the amount of points you set. So for a short travel sequence, for example, I've found somewhere between 2 and 4 points to give a pretty good end result. Now, something new to the Mini 4 Pro is that you can now also connect this directly to a computer, a laptop, or like an iPad, and you can easily just drag the footage out from the micro SD card as well as the internal storage without turning on the drone. So with the Mini 3 Pro, you actually had to take off the gimbal guard, turn on the drone, and wait for the drone to boot up before you could actually see the files and download these files. But what's the difference now is that with the Mini 3 Pro, you had to keep it on in order to drag all the files over to your computer. If you had a ton of files, it would take forever and it would still drain your battery. The Mini 4 Pro does also have internal storage. Even though it's on the lower end of only 2 GB, it's enough to get you 3 minutes of footage in 4K 30 FPS. So in case you're out flying and you suddenly get a message saying insufficient storage, you can switch over to the internal storage so you don't miss that sunset or sunrise. It's a nice addition, but I wish this storage was a little bit bigger. Now, one of the biggest concerns when it comes to the Mini 4 Pro is, of course, wind, because it's only 249 grams. And this is a question I get all the time, and there's so many different opinions out there, but I can only speak from my own experience. Just as the Mini 3 Pro, the Mini 4 will also struggle a bit in extreme windy conditions, but it's still manageable. During a turbulent flight, you will experience some warnings saying strong wind, decrease the altitude. The best thing is, of course, to lower the altitude, but flying in Hawaii, I got this warning on nearly all my flights, even when flying just a few meters above the ground at the beach. But what a lot of people don't know is that the gimbal will actually be the first thing that fails, and in worst case, it will twist. This happened to me last year with the Mini 3 Pro when a high gust just smashed into the drone, but visually, the drone itself managed to fly back. It was only the gimbal that needed a reset. But I still don't recommend flying in extreme windy conditions because I don't want you to damage your new drone. But if you really need an answer, both the Mini 3 Pro and the Mini 4 Pro are capable of some pretty extreme winds. Now, if you're the person that loves shooting hyperlapses with your drone, the Mini 4 Pro has a new added feature which makes it even better to capture those sunrises and sunsets. So during a hyperlapse, you can see on the screen here now that we have an icon or a number here that says +1s next to the amount of frames. This actually gives you the option to extend your hyperlapse even after the hyperlapse has started. So let's say you're out there shooting that hyperlapse for the sunset or sunrise, and then suddenly you see that, oh, the hyperlapse will end before the sun actually appears or disappears. Now you can just tap on this +1 second and it will add another second to the final video, and it will also extend the duration of the hyperlapse interval with 50 seconds. And you can also continue extending the hyperlapse for up to a maximum of 30 seconds. And this is just that extra spice which makes it so much easier to capture the whole thing or the whole hyperlapse that you want to capture, because it happens so many times, especially last year with the Mini 3 Pro when I was in Hawaii. I started a hyperlapse, and when the hyperlapse was like 80% done, I saw that, well, I'm not gonna make this anyways, so I just canceled that hyperlapse and I started over again. But now with this feature, I can just tap to extend it, so I will get a full hyperlapse sequence instead of just a shorter one, because I skipped 80% of the actual sequence. So to me, this is an interesting feature. Is it something I will use a lot? No, because I'm not taking that many hyperlapses. But is it something I will use when I'm shooting those hyperlapses? Yes. Now, which of these drones are the best buy for you? Can you settle with the Mini 3 Pro, or do you need the features that the Mini 4 Pro has to offer? I'm not gonna answer that question in today's video. That's also a question you have to answer yourself. But what I do have is an in-depth travel review of the Mini 4 Pro when I took it to Hawaii for 2 weeks. And I can assure you that that video is not a video where DJI sent me the Mini 4 Pro in order to say something good about it. So it's gonna be my honest review as a travel drone where I compare it a little bit towards the Mini 3 Pro. So I highly recommend that you check out that video, link down below. Now I'm also curious to know your thoughts about the Mini 4 Pro or the Mini 4 Pro versus the Mini 3 Pro. Which one do you prefer the most? Do you already have the Mini 4 Pro, or do you already have the Mini 3 Pro? Which one would you get? So let me know down in the comment section below. And if you're looking to get the Mini 4 Pro, there is a link down there as well, along with the ND filters by Freewell and My Signature LUTs. So that wraps it up. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a like if you found any valuable information in today's video, and I will catch you in the next one.